we are going to go ahead and do a question and answer panel. So if people have questions, please raise your hand and we'll go around the room. Start with Anne, please.
Yep. So I think the people in the room who are researchers might really enjoy knowing what the top two slides were what they were in the last slide from the ACOs, because, you know, it's a good example of kind of the good kind of science that's done in the field real time. So anyway, it's a good one.
That was my purpose, and then I departed after.
Yeah, that's okay. You could just
so those
bring
first
those
few
slides back.
pictures were, yeah, if you want to show the top left corner, and the top two pictures are both from the Athos 1 spill, which I think a responder's worst nightmare is submerged oil.
They're not pelts.
And because you can't see, Captain LaFerrier always taught me an oil spill response is like a battle. We use soft words like alternative response technologies and, you know, tools in our toolbox. And as a military organization, we kind of relate to more direct words like attack. You know, it's a war on the oil, stuff like that. It may not be a popular term, but submerged oil was a threat to the environment that we couldn't see. It was really tough and it was really hard to find. And the science told us that this Venezuelan crude oil was a floating oil. It was not a floating oil. It was supposed to be right there, but it was not a floating oil. And once it's found its way into the water column and collected sediment, it became submerged oil. And so they developed these pom-poms, drug them behind boats through the Delaware River to find the locations of the oil and to clean the oil. And we also used crab pots filled with these pom-poms and put them on strings in the water column by the nuclear power plant in Salem, New Jersey, to determine whether oil was migrating itself through the water column down to the intakes of those nuclear reactors. So, and then DM-932 down at the bottom, pretty, you know, fast water environment. Mississippi River is cruising along at a few knots. All your conventional techniques of surface oil collection doesn't always work. You have to use natural collection points, stuff like that. You know, you think you've made the right decision and that oil's moved on to a new spot. And then the political, economical realities is what I meant by that bottom picture on the right-hand side with, you know, science is even involved in the decontamination of vessels moving through a contaminated area. You know, where is the best place to decontaminate them? What is going to be impacted? What are the cleaning solutions are we going to use to clean the hulls of these vessels as they move in and out of the contaminated areas?
Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, Ian McDonald, Florida State University. I am a scientist, and I promise you that science tries to operate without emotions. It doesn't work. My question was about chronic releases, and I'm thinking specifically of the Mississippi Canyon 20 block, which I think is in your sector. So this is a block which was released, oil spill which started in 2004 when Hurricane Ivan destroyed the Taylor platform. And it's been pretty well documented that in calm weather, pretty substantial amounts of oil can accumulate on the surface. How does the Coast Guard respond when you know that there's going to be an event like this, out of sight, but nonetheless predictable?
Well, we do have bi-weekly overflights that go and check that out. And if it looks like there's potentially recoverable oil, then we do have Klingel associates, and they're on standby to head out.
Have they ever been mobilized?
They have been.
Yes, go ahead.
During Deepwater Horizon, Admiral Allen played a very significant, visible role with the public, and I think probably, you know, perspective probably is that, you know, the Coast Guard was trusted. He was a trusted communicator. I didn't hear you say anything about your outward-facing responsibilities in terms of communication and the community stakeholders, really, and you just alluded to Grand Isle and some of the sensitivities there. Who's really good at communicating besides that, Alan?
Wow. We're the best, right? Do you mean within the Coast Guard or just in general?
Well, you could start with the Coast Guard.
Okay. Well, we have several good communicators in the Coast Guard. I think maybe not just on the oil spill side. You know, sometimes you have to look at more of the all hazards response to see some of them, some of the recent cases. But we have an IMAT, an Incident Management Assist Team. So when we find ourselves with the big cases, we call in some folks to assist us. So they have a public affairs team that they can send out that will come out and help us either become the good communicator, maybe not Fat Alan good, but we can only get to a certain level, or find someone who can be the face of that response and communicate and has the trust of the community. You know, and ideally, you're in a unified command, so you want it to be a unified voice. And so whoever the spokesperson is, you know, you're going to have the RP and, you know, whatever other members of the unified command are going to be with you. And, you know, you can rotate the questions around depending upon who gets it.
So just to follow up on that is then, as part of the incident command structure, that individual or that position, that post, is part of the ICS?
Yes, I think we had it up on the, yes.
Yeah, I didn't see the communication role, but maybe it was there.
The PIO, it was a general slide, I might not.
Okay.
Okay. But is
So with
it a high-level position within the
Yes.
ICS?
It's right next to, it's right alongside like the SSC. You've got, command staff position, right off the unified command or the incident commander, you've got your PIO that's directly feeding the unified command and helping out. And in the really big ones, you'll set up a JIC, so a Joint Information Center. And they're going to give you talking points and everything that you need and try and prep you for any press conferences that you might have. They'll bring in, you know, local stakeholders, or if there's folks that want tours of the command post, you know, they'll arrange for all that and again give you talking points accordingly.
I think it's cyclic, though. I think Admiral Allen was unique because he came off of Hurricane Katrina and being lead responder for Hurricane Katrina, and he learned a lot. You know, I think he learned a lot of communication techniques and how to really hit the high points and what was important for the public to understand. And so as he rolled into Deepwater Horizon in the Coast Guard, and the president retained him even after his, you know, retirement, you know, it was because of those unique capabilities that just in time he learned. And I think as the Coast Guard, we're an ever-evolving organization, and it's based on experience. You know, you get those people who have experienced it, you know, early on in their career, and then as they come up, they're faced with that challenge, and they're uniquely qualified to like he was. So he was a great leader.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead, please.
So after the Deepwater Horizon, you could, with the passage of the Restore Act, you could foresee another very large event like the Deepwater Horizon legislation or some sort of mechanism by which money comes to the affected areas for restoration. And part of the Restore Act was based on the impact of the oil, how many miles of shoreline were oiled, that sort of thing, which was all determined and, you know, while the response was ongoing. And there was this really fascinating play about, you know, rat versus scat data, and, you know, that determined how much money some of these states got. And so my question is, has your response changed as a result of the precedent of Deepwater Horizon, and how what you're doing from a response perspective, identifying where the oil is and how you're identifying where it is in the coverage and that sort of thing, has that changed? And if so, you know, and why or why not?
So, go ahead, and then I'll take it from there.
Okay, just at least from our perspective, I think it put more importance, Lieutenant Dickson talked about the area committees. So it put more importance on the plans and making sure that we have a good plan in place and that we are engaging with all the stakeholders when we are developing that plan. So when you do have a large response and you go to execute, You know, it's not just the paper tiger. You're not throwing the plane out the window right at the first. You know, you have something, you exercise with your partners, you've seen these people, then you go into the response with them, and you have a fairly good idea of what you're going to do.
I think, and I'll let you talk policy, I'm going to talk a quick response. One of the,
Can you speak up? Those of us in the back are fighting.
yeah, one of the things I think that, and I will say along with Kelly, I didn't respond to Deepwater Horizon. I was doing some other stuff out up in National Marine Fisheries. But one of the key things that we've tried to do here in the Gulf, which has the Deepwater Horizon experience, is take the good things that we developed in Deepwater. It got very political, and there was a lot of information and a lot of very contentious and heavily bureaucratic ways of doing forms and things, and the information management point that Kelly made in terms of making sure that we have centralized information management and centralized data sharing has been a really key component, because people come to different conclusions. If you have different data to start with, you're always going to get to different conclusions. You know, if you have the same data, it's entirely likely you'll get to different conclusions depending on where you stand, but at least you're starting from the same data. So some of the things that we've really tried to move forward from the Deepwater experience through some of our bigger responses, like Texas City Y, which was the biggest response after Deepwater down here in the Gulf, is some of those processes in terms of clearly defined documentation, making sure that those forms are centralized and archived, and moving forward so that you are able to track back what happened in the response. Because let me tell you, if you put 200 people in a room working 16 hours a day for 20 days, you get a lot of documentation. And so trying to make sure that is clear, because once everybody goes home, all that's left is the documentation. That becomes the story of the response. So making sure that that is clear, and that how the decisions flowed from the documentation that you have there, from the activities that went on in the response, why the decision makers made those decisions. Because lots of times you look at it in hindsight, you're like, well, why did you decide to do that? That doesn't seem like it makes sense. But based on the information you had available, and it's often incomplete, and you do need to make a decision, because no decision is still a decision, it's just usually a bad one. Why did you decide to do what you did? This is what we knew based on the best available science, resources available, responder safety, public health safety. We decided to do X, you know, and making sure that that's documented there. Go ahead with policy.
Okay, so real quick,
You want to come to the mic? That way everybody can
sure.
hear you.
So real quick, the short answer is who knew, and I'll explain that, because the work that Paige just described is exactly what we would have probably done again for the next event. We won't do that in the future because we saw Congress actually change the law. The way the law previously existed, both the criminal and civil penalty funding would have gone elsewhere other than back through the Restore Act to the states. The natural resource damage assessment funding would still have done what it did. Whether for another large-scale event a similar law would be enacted, this one was specific for Deepwater, it's potentially possible. Knowing what we saw from Restore, we would probably look at that consistency issue and again try to do the best we can. But I'll say again, who knew? Because whatever law that Congress enacts for the next one may actually use a different criteria. And whatever that criteria is, hopefully we did the best we could and it existed. But that's a challenging question, and it set up a very interesting precedent for future events. And I can't predict that, but I think that's a critical piece of, if we come against the next large-scale event, will there be a similar act to Restore? How different will it be? Will they use the same model because of previous precedent? We don't know. But I would argue that at the time, the actions that were taken were perfectly logical, and had we gone forward with what normally occurs with the civil and criminal penalty side, this argument would never have occurred. So I'll leave you with that piece of it. And it's interesting because I think the larger, and that gets back to your question, the larger the scale of the event, the more there's going to be congressional and White House interest, and that may actually drive who actually can speak about what issues. So it's a, smaller scale. you know, we were always trained, if you own it, you can talk about it. But when the scales and the stakes get so high, that changes too, because of depending on who it is. Okay, did that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
There is no answer because every disaster is different, but I was curious if in current operations, in your planning exercises for big, large scale, like, do you always do SCAT now, or do you do it how you think and worry about the consequences later versus, you know?
No, I think you incorporate what we learned there. It's just a question of whether or not the next event will be treated the same way and the criteria the same way.
Okay, well, on that note, it's time for break. So we have a 15-minute break, so if everybody can, go ahead and stretch your legs, go outside. There's coffee somewhere. I wish I could tell you